How long was this going on? And was there a conflict that you saw? Because I think your perspective is so important. A conflict between the people who are running the show and the family in terms of what's best for Wendy?
I don't think no one knew exactly to the extent how bad it was. I felt like people knew something was up with her, but they didn't really know. I knew it because I've been around it, you know. It's sad to see something like that happen to her, you know.
Y'all, something about this story doesn't sit right, and the deeper you go, the darker it gets. For years, Wendy Williams was the loudest voice in celebrity gossip, exposing everyone else's secrets. But behind the cameras, insiders now claim she was the one being controlled slowly, quietly, and allegedly right in front of the world. Because what if everything you thought you knew was just the surface? An interview. A simple question. Did anyone really know how bad things were? And then, silence. Not confusion, fear. That's when Bert Girigori steps in, and what he suggests is chilling. He doesn't describe a health crisis. He doesn't describe a random downfall. He describes control. According to him, Kevin Hunter didn't just stand by while Wendy struggled. He allegedly used that struggle. Claims are now surfacing that substances weren't just part of her past. They may have been a tool. A way to keep her dependent. A way to keep her profitable. A way to keep her trapped. And suddenly, those strange on-air moments, the slurred words, the vacant stares, they don't look accidental anymore. They look calculated. Because if this is true, then this isn't just a story about addiction. This is a story about power, manipulation, and a woman losing control of her own life while the world watched and clapped. And the most disturbing part? The people around her may have seen it happening and said nothing. So the real question is, was Wendy Williams breaking down or being broken?
My thyroid, my hyperthyroid, is attached also to Graves' disease. Graves' disease squeezes the muscles behind your eyeballs. And so that's the reason for...
Williams said it was her viewers who convinced her to get checked out.
That is the eye thing that you all have been seeing. You caught it.
It started with a feeling, a pause, a hesitation, a moment on live television that felt off. For years, Wendy Williams built her empire on calling out everyone else. She was sharp, fearless, unpredictable, the one celebrity who said what others were too afraid to say. But somewhere along the way, something changed. At first, it was subtle. A strange look. A delayed reaction. Words that didn't land the way they used to. Viewers noticed. Fans questioned. But the answers never fully came. Instead, there were explanations. Health issues. Fatigue. Stress. And eventually, a diagnosis. Wendy revealed she was battling Graves' disease. A condition that explained the physical changes, the eye movement, the weight loss. And for a moment, it all made sense. But only for a moment. Because behind the scenes, insiders were starting to whisper something very different. They weren't talking about illness. They were talking about control. The first real crack in the story didn't come from the media. It came from someone who had known Wendy long before the fame, the cameras, the chaos. Bert Girigori. He had stayed silent for years. No interviews. No headlines. No public accusations. Until now. And when he finally spoke, the narrative shifted. According to Bert, what the world was seeing wasn't just a woman struggling with health issues. It was something deeper, something darker, something that had been building for years, hidden behind success and silence. He described a version of Wendy that most people never saw. Back in the early 90s, before the spotlight, before the controversy, Wendy was different. Focused, driven, fully in control of her life. She knew what she wanted, and she worked relentlessly to get it. But even then, there were signs. Bert claims that Wendy had already been dealing with substance use, quietly, privately, carefully hidden. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't chaotic. It was controlled. Until it wasn't. He remembers moments where her personality would shift. Where the energy changed. Where the woman he knew would suddenly feel distant. Like someone else had taken her place. Still, he tried to help. And for a while, it seemed like it was working. There were efforts to get better. Real attempts at stability. A sense that maybe things were turning around. But then, everything changed.
For some time now, and even today and beyond, I have been living in a sober house. I am driven by my 24-hour sober coach back to a home, lights out by 10 p.m. So I go to my room and I stare at the ceiling and I fall asleep to wake up, to come back here, to see you. So that is my truth.
Because after their marriage ended, another figure entered the picture. And that's where this story takes a darker turn. Kevin Hunter. At first, it looked like a power move. A partnership. Someone who could match Wendy's ambition and help elevate her career to the next level. And in many ways, that's exactly what happened. Kevin wasn't just a husband. He became her manager, her business partner, her gatekeeper. He controlled access. He controlled decisions. He controlled the narrative. And as Wendy's fame grew, so did his influence. From the outside, it looked like a strong, united front. But insiders tell a different story. A story where control slowly replaced partnership. Where dependence replaced independence. Where decisions were no longer hers to make. Because according to Bert, this wasn't just a relationship. It was a system. And at the center of that system was a dangerous allegation. That the very thing Wendy had once struggled with was now being used to keep her exactly where someone wanted her to be. Not completely broken, but never fully free. And if that's true, then what the world witnessed on camera wasn't just a decline. It was something far more calculated. Something far more controlled. And this is only the beginning.
For me personally, this is not putting words in anybody who might be a substance abuser's mind. But, I was raised better than that. And I never been arrested and wrecked my stellar radio career. And I never embarrassed my parents who are still married.
So it never really took off. It just threatened you.
It just threatened me. I never was broke off. I was always able to pay all of my bills and I lived a good life.
So here's it. You never hit a bottom.
Right.
And you saw it coming and you were able to, whatever it is, God stepped in, your own resources, whatever it was, you were able to.
I wanted better for myself.
By the time the cameras caught it, it had already been happening for years. Not suddenly, not randomly, but slowly, strategically, almost invisibly. Because what the public saw as strange moments on live TV, insiders now suggest may have been something far more controlled. After Kevin Hunter stepped fully into power, not just as a husband, but as manager and decision-maker, the dynamic around Wendy Williams began to shift in ways most people didn't immediately recognize. At first, it looked like protection. Kevin was everywhere. Handling business. Filtering opportunities. Managing access. No one got close to Wendy unless it went through him. And in the entertainment industry, that kind of control can look normal, even necessary. But behind the scenes, some say it wasn't protection. It was isolation. Because when one person controls who you speak to, who you trust, who you work with, they don't just manage your career. They manage your reality. And according to claims now being resurfaced, that's exactly what was happening. The most disturbing allegation? That Wendy's known struggle with substances didn't just return on its own. It was allegedly reintroduced. Not recklessly, not chaotically, but carefully, calculated, controlled. Because if someone is completely out of control, they become unpredictable. But if they are just dependent enough, just vulnerable enough, they become manageable. That's the theory being pushed by Bert Girigori, and it's one that paints a deeply unsettling picture. A system where Wendy wasn't allowed to fully collapse, but was never allowed to fully recover either. Because in that in-between state, she could still perform, still show up, still film, still generate millions. And that's exactly what she did.
My real name is Wendy Hunter. Yep. Mm-hmm. And I'm divorced.
Yes.
He's got no money. Yeah.
Even as the signs became harder to ignore, there were episodes where her words slurred, moments where her eyes seemed unfocused, pauses that felt too long, too empty. Viewers turned those clips into viral content. Some laughed, some speculated, some expressed concern, but almost no one understood what might have been happening behind the curtain. Because inside that world, silence ruled everything. Staff members saw it. They noticed the shifts. They felt the tension. But speaking out? That wasn't an option. Because jobs were on the line. Careers were at risk. And when power is concentrated in one place, people learn very quickly how to stay quiet. Even when something feels wrong. Even when it looks wrong. Even when it is wrong. One of the few voices to even hint at the truth was DJ Buff, someone who had been close enough to witness the environment firsthand. When fans began questioning Wendy's condition publicly, he didn't deny it. He didn't explain it either. He simply said, "You have no idea what's really going on." And, just like that, he was gone. No long explanation. No detailed statement. Just silence. The kind of silence that raises more questions than answers. And while all of this was unfolding behind the scenes, another layer of the story was quietly building. Because control wasn't the only allegation being whispered. There was betrayal too. Rumors began surfacing that Kevin wasn't just managing Wendy's life. He was living a completely separate one. A hidden relationship. A second reality. And if those rumors were true, then the situation becomes even darker. Because it suggests that while Wendy was allegedly being kept dependent, the person controlling everything may have already been planning an exit. An escape. A replacement. Which raises a chilling possibility. What if Wendy wasn't just being controlled? What if she was being slowly pushed aside? Not all at once, but piece by piece. Until the version of her that once ruled television was no longer in control of anything at all. And by the time the world started asking real questions, it may have already been too late. By the time everything started falling apart, it didn't look like a scandal anymore. It looked like a collapse. Not loud, not explosive, but slow, public, and impossible to ignore. Because the same woman who once controlled every headline was now becoming the headline. And this time, she wasn't the one telling the story. Wendy Williams was no longer just dealing with rumors. Her condition had become visible, unavoidable. There were increasing reports of serious health struggles, erratic behavior, extended absences, moments that felt disconnected from reality. And then came something even more disturbing. Guardianship. A legal structure that suggested Wendy was no longer fully in control of her own life, her finances, or even her decisions. For fans, it was shocking. For insiders, it wasn't surprising. Because if the earlier claims were true, if control had already been established behind the scenes, then this wasn't a sudden change. It was the final stage. The moment where everything that had been hidden became official. And yet, even in that state, one detail stood out. One memory that refused to fade. According to those close to the situation, even as Wendy's mental condition reportedly declined, even as confusion and instability increased, she still remembered one thing clearly. Kevin Hunter. And not as a partner, as a betrayal. Because by the time their relationship officially ended, the damage had already been done. The rumors of infidelity were no longer whispers. They were facts. A long-term affair. A hidden life. A second family. All unfolding while Wendy was still publicly standing by him, defending him, holding on to what she believed was real. And that's what makes this part of the story hit differently. Because it's not just about control. It's about trust. The kind of trust that, once broken, doesn't just hurt. It destroys. And when that betrayal finally became undeniable, the fallout was immediate. Divorce. Separation. Distance. But not freedom. Because walking away from a person doesn't always mean escaping what they left behind. Especially when the impact is deeper than just emotional. Because if the allegations are even partially true, then Wendy wasn't just dealing with heartbreak. She was dealing with the aftermath of years of influence. Years of dependency. Years of decisions that may not have been entirely her own. And the question that lingers now is one no one seems able to answer. How much of Wendy's downfall was truly hers? And how much of it was shaped by someone else? Public opinion has already started forming its own conclusion. Across social media, across comment sections, across every discussion tied to her name. One narrative keeps repeating. That Kevin Hunter wasn't just part of the problem. He was the problem. Accusations of manipulation. Claims of greed. Allegations of control. And at the center of it all, a woman who once had everything, now reduced to questions, to speculation, to concern. And maybe the most unsettling part of this entire story is not what we know. It's what we might never fully know. Because stories like this don't come with clean endings. They don't resolve neatly. They don't offer closure. They leave behind fragments, contradictions, voices that speak, and voices that stay silent. So, what really happened to Wendy Williams? Was this the tragic result of personal struggles spiraling out of control? Or was it something more calculated, more controlled, more deliberate than anyone wants to admit? Because if even a fraction of these allegations are true, then this isn't just a celebrity downfall. It's a story about power, about influence, about what happens when the person the world trusts to speak the truth may not have been free to live her own. And that might be the most disturbing revelation of all. And now, everything comes down to this. Because the more you look at this story, the harder it becomes to ignore one chilling possibility. What if this was never just a personal downfall? What if what we witnessed was a slow, controlled unraveling happening in plain sight? A woman who built her empire on exposing secrets may have been living inside one. The clips you laughed at, the moments that went viral, the headlines that felt off, they don't hit the same anymore. They feel darker, heavier, almost like pieces of something much bigger that no one fully understood at the time. And if these allegations hold even a fraction of truth, then this isn't just about addiction or illness. This is about influence, about control, about what happens when power is placed in the wrong hands and no one steps in. Because let's be real, people saw it. People questioned it. People talked. But no one stopped it. And now the damage is already done. The betrayal, the manipulation, the silence, it all led here. To a story that still doesn't have clear answers. So the real question isn't just what happened to Wendy Williams. The real question is, who allowed it to happen? And more importantly, what else like this is happening right now, behind closed doors, behind cameras, hidden under the same spotlight we trust every day? If this shocked you, you already know what to do. Because this story isn't over. Not even close.